My grandmother, Queen Mother Frances Pierce, was an organizer and a hairdresser and like a radical black nationalist. And when I was young, that made me very uncomfortable because she would always wear dashikis and like we would argue about like O.J. Simpson and just all this. I was like, why are you so radical? Slow down. And I think she was planting seeds in me that would take years to grow into fruition. And my parents, my mom is a singer, my dad is an architect, they've always been involved in work that they love to do. And I think I've known from a young age that I've really loved music, working with music, and I love working in community spaces. Prior to like Beat Making Lab and Artivism Studios, when I was an undergrad at UNC in the Department of African American Studies, I know that at UNC is really kind of going through the ringer right now because of the academic scandal, but my experience there as a non-athlete was actually really inspiring and challenging and moving and amazing and changed my perspective because I was learning about things that I just didn't learn about at Durham School of the Arts or at Williston. I finished high school at a boarding school. But I was learning about like Carter G. Woodson and Miseducation of the Negro and kind of reading these texts and learning about these artists and writers and thinkers that where I kind of, looking back, was feeling like was a glaring omission from my high school curriculum. So the initial kind of desire to push to create like curriculums and work with youth was really based on like, wow, I'm really privileged. I'm at college learning about all this stuff. Meanwhile, a lot of my friends, many of whom won't be going to college, and if they do, won't be studying something like African American studies, are oblivious to these gems that I'm collecting daily that kind of reminded me of my grandmother and just were so impactful and seemed so basic and important to share. So I developed this like hip hop curriculum called Black Academics and went to my alma mater, Durham School of the Arts, and began to teach after school workshops and like basically analyzing lyrics and doing like writing workshops and stuff at my old school. And so I was doing this during college, during grad school. I moved to LA and was working with a nonprofit called the Thelonious Monk Institute of Jazz, doing a bebop to hip hop program in South Central Los Angeles, similar work, after school program with kids. And then when I was asked to co-teach Beat Making Lab with Apple Juice at UNC, it was like, yo, like this is such an amazing tool that we can use to build with community, through music making. And it took like a couple years for me to really understand how I could go about doing the work with the most integrity for me. And that includes like transitioning a little from what I was doing 2 years ago, which was like kind of doing 2-week residencies in community centers around the world, to like focusing all of the lion's share of my energy into a local space right in Chapel Hill. Hopefully we'll be opening up a studio in Durham later this year. And I feel like that's both how I'm inclined as a person to kind of plant seeds and invest the way my grandmother did, as opposed to focusing my work on fleeting residencies that only last for a little bit of time. So does that answer your question? Okay, cool. I'm very long-winded, my wife tells me. Yeah, I think for me, art is a reflection of your life and your experience. So if you want people to be able to creatively transform their artistic pieces into something that speaks to the issues that either culturally or in their own lives, I would encourage them I would put them on to some like important reading, get them engaged in communities, doing work, and like being hands-on with some of the people most affected by these social catastrophes. So like, for example, I deal with racial profiling, like a lot of people of color deal with racial profiling when I'm driving up 40, but something like police brutality, which has been a big part of the national debate for the past year, exponentially affects working class people a lot more than it does me when I'm driving on the highway, you know, and I learned that in communication with our students, some of whom are from like the skate park in Durham, and they're like, yo, I get hemmed up every day. Like the skate park in Durham is right across the street from the police station. And, you know, they're kind of harassed on a daily basis by the state. And, you know, so we talk about that and we reflect upon that and we meditate on that and we read about that and we connect that to global systems of oppression that, you know, this is going on in some places in the Democratic Republic of Congo or in Palestine or in Durham, you know, like the kind of all oppression is connected. We kind of connect those dots for them. Then with no real prodding into their creative process, when he steps up to the MPC and is making that beat, he's like sampling Muhammad Ali clips and like, you know, his bars are all about some of the things that we've discussed in conjunction with some of his life experiences that he's beginning to look at with a more critical eye. So I think like to go back to Harriet when she says, you know, I could have freed 1,000 more slaves if only they knew they were enslaved. Like that, a lot of that history and a lot of that context is invisible because there are a lot of distractions and a lot of misinformation out there. And so you just have to be kind of intentional about being a sponge. And I think and the rest will follow. Huh? Huh? Okay, yeah. I don't think I do this enough as a practice, but I know that it helps every time I try it. And that's meditation, like sitting and being quiet and by yourself for some time has always been a useful practice in a creative process. Again, I think that the culture we live in is one of kind of fleeting attention spans and lots of options. And part of what makes it difficult to tap into the own well springs of creativity, which are within us all, is the extent to which we're kind of, you know, it's like overkill, you know, up here. So I find that kind of slowing down and meditating, kind of being present to your emotions and your feelings about things helps, you know, it's like a key that can unlock different creative spaces. I don't know why I'm focused on the gut, but so yeah, that's one thing. Yeah. Oh, can I show a picture? Cause like I'm that dad, like I'm totally that dad. Okay, so first of all, this is my computer. Don't laugh if you see something embarrassing. Yes, I'm not on the internet. Oh, here we go, Pierce. Family, let's see what we got. Oh, there's nothing in the family folder. That's strange. Okay, here's Justice.
Happy Father's Day, Dad. I love you.
Okay, please let me know if it gets any cuter than that, because and this is Stella. Anyway, that was from the Sleeping in My Bed video shoot. Okay. Anyway, in the front row is my homie Salim. We collaborate on a bunch of projects. Can we give him a round of applause? And one of the things we share is fatherhood. And this clip is from a video for a song called Sleeping in My Bed, which is a song by The Beast about parenting. And Salim's son Raheem is in the video also. It's super cute. Anyway, how do I incorporate the kids? Well, yesterday, for example, they were just on my hip all day. Like, they came with me to get my locks twisted. We went to Best Buy to put a laptop that had a virus on it in there with the Geek Squad. Then in the parking lot with Best Buy, this is by New Hope Commons, you know how like around 4th of July, they have those like pop-up firework cells? And so when I was little, we had they almost look like little sperm. They have like a little tail and you on the ground. So I was like, yo, we should, you know, we got some fireworks. Anyway, but then they came to the studio and they were in there. Josh was in there, the same guy I mentioned that scored the documentary on Ferguson, was in there like playing beats. Justice like, let's do a dance battle. So we're doing a dance battle. Stella's in the office on the dry erase board, kind of drawing pictures. And we're kind of engaging. We just got back from Detroit, where we brought 8 youth from the Durham Chapel Hill area to a conference called the Allied Media Conference. And while we were there, it was the first national convening of Black Lives Matter chapters. And so we went to that and involved our youth, the same youth from the last slide that you saw, in this conference. It was really dope. But there were some students there. Khalil and Coleman were there. DJ Day, another young student, a 17-year-old from Pittsburgh that comes through the studio all the time, was there. And we're talking about like the Black Lives Matter convening, and we're like making music and dancing. And so for them, I think a lot of it is just like, that's what I do. And so they are almost like peripheral vision. They're just kind of soaking in, there's no like morning freedom school at the Freelon household. It's more just like the music, it's like the music we listen to and the spaces that we engage in on a daily basis become something that they're a part of. And it's a lot of my friends like Salim are creative people. A lot of them are organizers. I'm part of a collective called Black Is, stands for Black International Solidarity. And, they're hanging around my kids all the time. So, and a lot of it, how you dress is political, how you wear your hair is political, the types of language you use is political. So it's interesting. I hadn't thought about this in this particular context, but I use "come on, guys" as like a term to speak to my kids when I want them to move somewhere. Come on, guys, let's go. Stella Pierce is my daughter's name. Stella, this girl right here, she's like, guys. I'm not a guy. And I'm like, oh, sorry, come on, people, And then she just kind of shakes her head. And so she's checking me on the language that I use, because it's in the same way, this ubiquitous, I'm talked a lot about race in the piece, but, patriarchy is the thing, the standard is men. And my daughter already at 5 years old is calling me out on language that I use that is referring to her as a man. She's not a man, so anyway. Top 3 musicians? Whoa. Wow. Okay, so, all right, abstract answer to your question. Number 1, I would have to say the ancestors, all the people whose names we'll never know that have, because here's the thing, like, I think there's nothing new under the sun, like, every piece of music we're listening to is like the cumulative contribution of people who will never know. The songs, the melodies, the ancestors. So number 1 would be the ancestors, okay? I must put Nina Simone on that list. First of all, she's from North Carolina, so cool points. But she's also just, her voice, she could play, she could sing, she was political, she was beautiful, radical, everything. Nina Simone, the ancestors. And, wow. This last one is too much. I must? Okay, so there's a request that I mention someone contemporary. See, I feel like it would be cliche to say like Kendrick Lamar. He's like my favorite rapper right now. If you're asking contemporary artists, he's my favorite. Particularly How to Pimp a Butterfly, the album is like, that and D'Angelo's Black Messiah are like 2 really good albums that I've been listening to recently. I don't know. I think the third one would have to be ... But with a contemporary, with a 2015 first half honorable mention for Kendrick Lamar and D'Angelo. Yeah, so for me, one of the biggest conscientizing agents in my life was a song by, so my answer is through the arts. Yeah, that's the answer. I think like Kendrick Lamar is doing more to conscientize people in this country in this moment or just as much as anybody or anything through his most recent album. But for me, it was Nas. Nas had a song called I Can on his album Stillmatic, and it's actually a really cheesy song. He's like sampling Beethoven, and like the first 2 verses are kind of but then the third verse, he says, before we came to this country, there were kings and queens, never poor monkeys. There were empires in Africa called Kush, Timbuktu, where every race came to read books. Now, I heard that song before I got into my first African American Studies class, but I know what Kush is. Kush is not an African kingdom. It's a slang term for marijuana, okay? It's Kush, you know, it's a slang term for weed. So I was like, huh. I heard the bar, I was like, huh. Empires in Africa called Kush. Is he trying to say that like African people smoke a lot of weed? Like, I didn't know where he was going with the line. Then I got to class and found out that no, Kush is actually an African kingdom. Timbuktu was actually a huge African library hundreds of years before like some of these other civilizations were even doing any kind of astrology and math and science at the level they were doing it in Africa. And so, you know, that was a conscientizing thing for me. So I heard it, and then when it was affirmed in class, I was like, wow, that's crazy, you know? So I think like art is very powerful, and that's why spaces like these are so important, you know, CAM, and why the voices of artists and nurturing kind of young people to speak truth to their own life experiences can be something that transforms people's minds and bodies and hearts. And there are tons of examples like Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit. Boom, it was right there with Ida B. Wells and the anti-lynching movement, like instrumental, play on words, in the anti-lynching movement. And you know, again and again, you know, John Coltrane's Alabama, or, you know, KRS-One's Self-Destruction. I think that music has always kind of been connected to movements, and but a lot of times, like learning about it in the way that I did is a very kind of nuanced and privileged opportunity, and it's that message is translated at a more like spiritual level through art, you know, than it is just trying to be like, hey brother, did you know Harriet Tubman was da 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 da? I'd be like, dog, get out of here, you know, like. So I would say art could be a vessel for that. Yeah, so there's tons of studios where you can go book like studio time, and you know, for whatever, $50 an hour, or sometimes a lot cheaper, sometimes a lot more expensive. And basically, you know, you get in front of a microphone, you bring an MP3 of the song or get them to make something, and then, you know, we can put you up with people who can, John Law. There's just a lot of local artists who are capable of doing that for you, and I would really love to hear your bars. But the studio, Artivism space, is really centered around community. And it's a free community resource. We're open like after school hours, like 4 to 8. And we give, it's a privileged space for youth. And we define youth around, like, you know, 15 to like 25, youth around Chapel Hill, Durham community.
So, sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, no, sure.
So, like a 7-year-old is not different. Like,
Well, it's not exclusive to those spaces. It's just privilege is the word that we use, because that we found that that's the age group that is most well equipped to do the work that we're trying to do there. So, and by what I mean by the work we're trying to do, so anybody can kind of come in and like utilize the spaces as a studio, like a hired engineer. But the space is about learning. So when youth come in and they're like, yo, I want to put some verses down on my mixtape, I say, all right, well, let me teach you how to use the music software so that you can do it yourself. And so I'm not like an engineer up there typing while they work. They're like either on my shoulder or themselves running the session, so that the next time they come in, it's not a question of, can I do this? It's like, when can I do this? You know, it's like, all right, we got a block from 5 to 6. That's all, y'all go in, fellas. Like, we're sisters, you know, go in, Stella. You know, go in and do your thing. So.
more like teaching them how to fish.
Exactly, teaching them how to fish, and you know, it's harder for a 7-year-old to fish. You're like, hey, get the worm. They're like, ew. You know what I mean? So we find that like high school, middle school too, but high school, particularly with like the political education that we try to weave into it as well, high school is like the ideal demo. But then like, it's crazy how funding and opportunities stop for kids after they turn 18. It's like, oh, you're an adult now. Good luck, you know? So we think of youth as like, you know, in broad strokes, like 15 to 25, you know, we try to engage all that. But there's elders in there, there's people there's a father-daughter duo that are in there making beats and doing stuff in there, and there's young kids, including my own, that come through the space as well. Well, I'll answer the last part first. I aspire towards the prophets, you know. I wouldn't dare put myself in the same sentence as them in terms of like significance, but I'm inspired by the work that they do, and I draw energy from it, you know, when I need energy to run and to continue the work that I do, which is it's difficult work, it's long hours, and you know, sometimes that album or that song kind of gives you what you need to continue the work. And it gives you like strategies, pathways of kind of like, oh, they did it like this, you know, you can kind of learn from them. The first part of the question about how I see this kind of Afrofuturist thinking, yeah, I think like all of the people we just mentioned were artivists. And I think a lot of activists are like, a lot of the ones that I know, the organizers that I know, they're very kind of practical and strategic and technical, and they're hitting the ground and they're doing the, what do you call those? Sign up for me so there's solidarity around the issue thing. Petitions, yes, petitions. They're like doing petitions, they're organizing rallies, and kind of got this thing going. But there's that artistic component is missing. And if you aren't creative in your thinking about anything you're trying to do, it's going to be very difficult to get it done. And so, like when I think about like Sun Ra, for example, and the you know, ensemble, all the stuff that he did was just, it was just a completely different universe. And that was what Harriet was doing. Like, it's so important to realize Harriet was just a freak of nature for her time. There were people around her, not just other enslaved people. She said that didn't even realize they were enslaved, but just the society at large. You know, black people may have been a majority in some of the South, but you know, it's like, yo, what are we gonna do against an army? Like, you're trying to run away, you're trying to get free. It's as daunting as anything, you know, you could possibly imagine. But if you don't have that kind of creative will, that insurmountable odd, yeah, I got that, you know, kind of mentality to it, then you don't have visionaries that kind of rise up to the occasion to kind of, you know, strike the empire back, you know. So I think that everyone you mentioned just obliterates convention and just moves to their own rhythm. And that is another thing that I think, not only in kind of organizer activist spaces, but in any medium that y'all work in. If you're a videographer, if you're a visual artist, if you're a photographer, you know, if you're not like, you know, just like Hulk, you know, swelling out of the, or maybe not even, you know, Hulk, that's kind of like a violent metaphor, but I think, because you don't have to be smashing the boxes, you can like, you know what I mean? Like, but if you're not doing your own thing and thinking creatively, then, you know, there's only a limit to how far you can go and the type of work that you'll be capable of. Because our brains are so massive. It's as massive as the multiverse, you know? So we need to tap into that more and kind of trust that, that investing in a process that kind of nurtures those energies is gonna put you in a place where you need to be.